What is the science of reading? What are leaders doing to accelerate reading achievement? We answer these questions and more in Science of Reading Leadership, Guiding Minds, Transforming Lives, powered by Just Right Reader. My name is Terry Hunt, and we are here with another amazing conversation with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. She is a researcher, educational consultant, and author who works with schools and agencies in the United States and internationally. Dr. Hasbrouck worked as a reading specialist and a literacy coach for 15 years and later became a professor. Her research in reading fluency, academic assessments and interventions, and instructional coaching has been widely published. She is an author, a co-author, and co-editor of several books, along with some assessment tools. She continues to collaborate with researchers and school colleagues on projects related to reading interventions, assessments, and instructional coaching. I am personally excited to be in this conversation for so many different reasons, but I just want to take a moment to say thank you for joining us. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into education.
Okay, well, thank you, Terry. That was yeah. I'm old enough now, have long enough career that the introduction can take most of the time if we we talk about everything. But teaching was I don't know. I talked to many of my colleagues, and quite possibly you as well, that feel that they were called to teaching, that it's a calling rather than just a professional choice out of a list. Oh, I guess I'll be a teacher. I always loved school. It was a place of joy and comfort to me. And it just felt like a good match. So I had lots of different visions of what kind of teaching, at what level, what grade, what would I focus on. But at the suggestion of a teacher when I was in high school, reading became a focus of my work, and then a passion for sure. It's been really interesting. And how lucky for me right now at this stage where the research is just confirming and adding to our knowledge about what best practice is for reading. It's a very exciting time. We think back, many decades ago, and we were functioning a lot on theory and doing okay. If we expose children to literature and practice a little bit and read to them, and a whole lot of kids are going to learn to read, but we have figured out what was faulty about those theories and what works well. And now we just have to figure out how to do all of that in real world classrooms with high levels of diversity. And so that's the exciting thing for me, is to work with schools and help them try to figure that part out.
Yeah, I love the fact that you said that teaching is a calling, because I really have always felt like that. And I really love the idea that as we start to understand more of our niche and where we really, really fit into that puzzle that is education, into that calling, we can really begin to really move the needle and impact change. And I hear that in your love for being a literacy coach. So, can we talk a little bit about that? I want to hear about that experience. I want to know how, what you feel like you learned or even brought to the field as a literacy coach. And I love how you talked about how things have changed over time. And I really want to talk about that engagement with teachers and what has it taught you? What have you seen? Where do you see it going?
Well, that interesting part of my career, almost a segue in some ways. Coaching did not feel like a calling to me. It was not like, ooh, I want to be a literacy coach or an instructional coach when I grow up. It was handed to me as an option to consider by my boss at the time. I was a reading specialist and saw myself doing that for quite a bit longer. He had a different idea and suggested that I take on this role where I would go out into the classrooms of teachers and, as he described it back then, help them. It wasn't a very well defined role, and that was good for me because after over a decade as a teacher, I didn't really know it, but I was ready for a little bit of an intellectual challenge, and boy did I get one being handed this new role of go help teachers. Figuring out what in the world that meant, figuring out right away, that some teachers were eager for help. Some teachers wanted nothing to do with me. Some teachers clearly, obviously needed some support, so much so that I was overwhelmed. Like, where would I even start? And then, of course, so many teachers that I had contact with didn't seem to need any help at all. They were doing great. And so what is my role? I had to figure out everything about that, which sent me back. That's really what sent me back for my PhD, and working with wonderful colleagues at 2 different universities and learning a lot about that coaching role. And I think it's obvious to many, but it took me a little bit of a while to figure it out that my job as a coach is not to go into classrooms and make everybody clones of Jan Hasbrouck. I had figured out a pretty good way to teach, and I was very lucky. I had been originally taught how to teach reading in a way that we would today call the science of reading. And that was, 50 decades ago, not 50 decades, 50 years
Say,
ago.
you look good.
Yeah, over 50 decades. Yeah, I think so too. But I was a pretty good teacher. I certainly was better at that stage than I was in my first few years, with experience and good knowledge and support along the way. But learning that my colleagues, there are different ways of being a really good teacher. There's not one size fits all, and helping teachers who had really different classroom management, organizational styles, and those kinds of things, finding a way to truly collaborate for the purpose of children, focusing a lot less on me as the coach, getting my ego out of the way. It's not about me. It's not about you, actually. It's really about the children and how we together can figure out, to the best available, to the best of our always limited knowledge and skills and resources.
Yeah, and I really think that that's what this podcast really is all about, right?
Mm.
Coming together as leaders, having these conversations, pulling out all the gems, because it really is about the children. It really is about the students and helping them to flourish and grow and accelerate their achievement, right? So I want to
Exactly.
talk about that a little bit more. I want to talk about your research around reading fluency.
Mhm.
It's very widely recognized, and it's been amazing the work that you're doing. Can you explain a little bit about why reading fluency is so critical for students and their overall reading development? And can you tell us a little bit about what your findings and your research has shown in this area?
Yeah. Well, I talk about fluency a lot because I have done work in this area. In fact, yesterday I was working with some schools. We talked about fluency as a developmental process. And your first question, why is it important? We've known for a long time, and we can just go back and read, now the historical document of the National Reading Panel report,
Yeah.
that in their chapter on fluency said flat out, students have to be fluent if we want them to comprehend. Motivation is probably in there too, but we have a whole lot more research on the connection between fluency and comprehension. And one of the misunderstandings we often think about fluency in terms of rate, how
Mm.
quickly or the speed with which students read. And people wonder, how does that affect comprehension? Well, let's back up a little bit and realize that the foundation of reading fluency is accuracy.
Mhm.
Rate is the secondary component. It is not the most important. It's one we focus on because we measure rate in terms of words correct per minute, those kinds of things. But if you think about the foundation of fluency being automaticity and
Right.
the foundation of automaticity being accuracy, then okay, that makes sense that you would need a certain level of accuracy in order to comprehend.
Yeah.
In order to make this printed language or the symbolized language interpretable to our brain, it has to come in at a certain speed. That's where the rate is. It's just language comprehension. It's language understanding. If language information comes into our brain either too slowly or too
Mm.
quickly, our brain can't manage it. So we have to help our students learn to decode and process text, what we call fluently,
Mhm.
so that their brain can understand what they're reading. But that process doesn't start when they're starting to read text. It starts way back when they're learning letter names and letter
Mm.
sounds and words and phrases. That's the work of my esteemed colleague Marianne Wolf and her colleague Katzer Cohen and others. But I frequently cite their work as reminding us that if we truly want our students to be fluent readers and comprehenders, we have to start laying that automaticity foundation back when we're teaching letter names and letter sounds and words and phrases. So accuracy first, always, first, foremost, and forever. It has to have that foundation. But we can do that with letter names and letter sounds. Okay, here's 5 letters. Let's learn their names. Let's learn their sounds. Very good. Now you know them. Let's see if you can say them a little bit faster. We'll put them in random order. Then we get to blending. Here's some words. Let's do it accurately first. Let's do it a couple of times. Very nice. You sounded out that word or these words. Now let's read them a little bit faster. And then with phrases. So I think we should all be paying more attention to that so that once we get to text, we're not, oh dear, this child isn't fluent. Well, we perhaps haven't laid that foundation for fluency at those interim component levels.
That is a powerful statement. Like the fact that fluency starts way back when we begin. That's huge. Another thing that I notice when I look at your research and I look at the work that you've done is that there is a big intersection, a frequent intersection with dyslexia and fluency. Can you talk to us a little bit more about let's even start with the term dyslexia,
Yeah.
right? It's become so widely used, but really, what is dyslexia? Let's start there. Let's define
Mhm.
it so that we can see that intersection and figure out some best practices for supporting students with dyslexia.
Yeah. Well, we know that there is a number of students, a number of children who are born with brain language processing. I guess I'll use that term. Challenges that are neurological, genetic. It appears as we're learning more about that. And that manifests itself with challenges in learning to read, write, and spell on a spectrum. There's agreement that this is a spectrum disorder, so you can have very mild to very severe. We do know that early intervention and identification can really help because we know a lot about the instruction. But we also know that how that neurologically, organically based dyslexia manifests can look very similar in other children who may or may not, because we really
Mm.
don't know how to precisely identify, okay, you were born with dyslexia. You have all the characteristics of dyslexia, but your brain is intact. But we don't know that as teachers.
Right.
And that is, I would say, the basis of most of the discussion, if
Yeah.
you will, among experts, people who have devoted their lives to study dyslexia as researchers have come to really different conclusions about what dyslexia is. Some just say, since we really can't figure out who has the brain-based disorder and who hasn't, let's just put dyslexia on a spectrum of difficulty with word reading
Mm-hmm.
and not worry about the causal factors so much. And then when we talk about what's the percentage of the population that has dyslexia, that's simply going to be a manifestation of where we draw the line. We're going to call this percentage dyslexia, or we're going to call this percentage dyslexia. There's just a lot of disagreement about all those things. But underlying all that is the really important thing. In my opinion, I'm such a practical person because there's children involved. Let's spend less time talking about defining dyslexia and talk about what do we do about
Yes.
it, because the consensus from not everybody, but most people that I see are really researching dyslexia and really looking at intervention, studying interventions and the fact of interventions, is that no matter why you're struggling with reading, the interventions are going to be the same. They're not going to be identical for everybody because some children have challenges with language, and I'm using Scarborough's rope here with my hands.
Right. I do that all the time.
Talk with language.
Right.
Some children are going to have language issues and text processing issues or text identification issues. Some are going to have beautiful, intact, even gifted abilities in language and still have problems. So we're going to do language plus word recognition interventions for some children. We're going to do language only interventions with some children, and so the actual intervention is going to be more individualized, but good reading instruction is good reading instruction. That we are coming to that conclusion. And then at the end of the day, the difference is going to be dosage. Some of our children that we may call dyslexic, having characteristics of dyslexia anyway, are going to need many, 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 many more opportunities to practice and receive clarification and feedback and than our neurotypical children or children who don't struggle. It's a fascinating world. I know that there's a thing called dyslexia, a real thing. My daughter is one of those people who has all those characteristics. But at the end of the day, we as teachers, I worry badly that we're still spending so much time in the identification process and then using that as access to services rather than let's just figure out how to provide services to any child who needs it because they're struggling with reading for whatever the cause. That if I could choose how we would do things in schools, that's what I would do.
This episode is brought to you by Just Right Reader. Extend phonics instruction, strengthen school-home partnerships, and accelerate reading achievement with take-home decodable packs from Just Right Reader. Personalized take-home packs make phonics fun and accessible for families. Every book comes with a video phonics lesson and writing pages to help readers reinforce their decoding and writing skills. To learn more, visit justrightreader.com. So because I really think that I want to hone in on what you just said, because what you just said was really powerful. Good reading instruction is good for all students. And when we are identifying, because for me as an instructional coach and as a classroom educator, the frustrating part for me was that I was being brought students with diagnosis of dyslexia, but no clear strategy, right? When we have all of these other diagnoses, there's clear strategies for what we should do. And they were bringing me these children with no clear strategy for them,
Mhm.
right? And so what I hear you saying is the strategy is good instruction, good
Yeah.
phonics instruction, good word recognition, fluency, all good instruction. The I guess you could say the difference or the part where we need to focus is now how do we give them more engagement? How do we identify the numbers of instructions and times that they need on that good or with that good quality instruction?
Yes, and which components to focus on, because
Hmm.
that's the one concern I have with the statement of good instruction is good for everybody, because then what some people are doing is saying, we have figured out, for instance, that phonemic awareness is really, really necessary, and a whole lot of kids struggle with that. So let's give my whole class tons of instruction on phonemic awareness. Well, phonemic awareness and then the next phase, learning decodable text,
Right.
those are all stepping stones to this outcome of reading that we want. And we should not be one size fits alling kids. Once they've acquired sufficient phoneme awareness and they have broken the code, they have the alphabetic principle down, we should move them as quickly as possible. So that's the real challenge of classrooms, where we may have children entering kindergarten or first grade really reading. They've already done that work, and children who are going to need so much intensive intervention. How do we do that in a classroom? And I worry about this. People trying to solve those problems with one size fits
One
all,
size fit
whole
all. Yeah.
class instruction for everybody. That may be appropriate in some classrooms where all the kids really are at about the same place. But I think we need to get much more creative about how we provide instruction, how we do grouping, whole class, additional small group. Um, I think it's very rare that we can really sufficiently meet every student's need only staying within one classroom. I think we have to go across classrooms, across grades, when those are options for us to do, because the goal is to differentiate this incredibly complex thing of reading instruction. So every child is moving at their rate, whether they're a skillful reader or a reader who struggles with because of dyslexia or other reasons.
Yeah, you have really done a fabulous job of being very concise and very pointed about your theories and your thoughts and your research. I really appreciate this idea that, yes, good instruction is good instruction, but let's be very intentional about assessing what our students need and then providing them with the quality instruction that is quality for them,
That's exactly right. That's the
right?
challenge. That is the challenge. Well, there's lots of challenges built into that statement.
In this
Because
conversation,
the
that's the challenge.
assessment piece, let's just make sure we assess them well. The schools I was working with in Maine are challenged with a challenge I see in many, many schools. They're simply doing too much assessing. They're doing too much.
Yeah.
So they're doing layers of stuff. What we want to get into the hands of teachers are those quick, efficient, high quality, reliable assessments that give us actionable information. So the answer is not just do more assessment. Oh my goodness, no. But at the end of the day, we do need to the extent we possibly can, because we have to, have to be realistic in the resources we have of time,
Yeah.
personnel, materials, all of those kinds of things. But that's what our children deserve, is our best efforts to give them what they need to launch them. And what we know, I mean, the research is so exciting. When we get this right, we're going to be sending 95 to 98% of first graders into second grade reading.
Isn't that
Is
exciting?
it
That gives
is
me
unbelievable.
chills.
It gives me chills too.
I love it. I love that. Before we leave this topic, because I do want to talk about your book, right? I want to talk about what you're doing. But before we leave that, I do want to ask if there are any strategies that you have found that really work well and are beneficial for improving the fluency and comprehension skills of students who do have some of those dyslexic diagnosis, or even just are presenting themselves, like you said, as a child that is working with dyslexia. Have you
Yeah.
found any strategies that are really beneficial for them in fluency and comprehension?
I think, well, the foundation has to be there. The foundation of fluency is accuracy. So we don't just dump kids into text and have them practice it so that they build that automaticity. We have to do all that work to get them ready for the accuracy piece. But that can be built in once students are basically, they figured out how to decode and read words, and they're building their orthographic lexicon of sight words, and we're always building vocabulary and background. Various forms of repeated reading is really the thing that I have seen gets a student more fluent. And structured partner reading, structured opportunities for a student to reread a piece of text to build accuracy first, then automaticity, and then reading it with the expression and paying attention to what the text means. There are various programs and various strategies for doing that. The work of Freddie Hebert, making, when we really control the text so that these multiple passages that students are reading have certain amounts of text that overlap. So they're seeing the same words in different contexts and different phrasings to build that orthographic instantaneous representation in the brain. There are various forms of high quality repeated reading that we can and should do for our students that seems to build those neurosynapses so that fluent reading can actually happen.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So let's talk about your book,
Okay.
right? You have a new book that just came out. Tell us about it. What is it about? Tell us more about that.
Well, I believe you are talking about Climbing the Ladder of Reading and Writing. That's the newest book that I had the great pleasure of co-editing with Nancy Young. She has created an infographic originally called The Ladder of Reading. Okay. But because Nancy keeps current on research, she was watching our emphasis and understanding that, especially at the early stages when we teach reading and writing together, kids do better. And we decided that rather than us writing the book, that we would reach out to people in the field, and often the people we reached out to were world-renowned researchers in the field that would talk about what are some of the challenges of teaching children to read. What about developmental language delay? What about children with intellectual disabilities? What about older children that didn't learn to read? What about children with attention deficit disorder? And what about children who are deaf or hard of hearing? So we reached out to many, many people, and this is not a textbook where these researchers are writing about their research. It seems to have accomplished what we wanted, that it's a informative, up-to-date journey through what is this thing called learning to read and write. How do we accomplish it for all children with dyslexia, children with ADHD, children who are gifted in reading? It's the broad spectrum.
So good. I mean, as a early literacy like fanatic, and as an instructional coach and a teacher, everything you just said just makes me so happy. This has been a fabulous conversation. I have learned so much, and I am so thrilled that you joined us. And you shared so much. So I want to bring it all together, and I would love for you, right? This is the Science of Reading Leadership Podcast. So we have lots of leaders all over the country who are listening to the conversations that we're having. And if you were to take everything that we've talked about, everything you're passionate about, and you were going to give 2 leadership actions to the leaders around the country about literacy development, fluency, all of the things, what would those two actions be for leaders?
Well, I think it's important to keep trying, keep working with all of our students. Keeping informed about all of that growing body of evidence. We refer to it these days as the science of reading, but because it is science, it continues to change and grow. That's what scientists do. They're always doing studies. One popped up in my email box today. I've got to go read another study by Sharon Vaughn that she just published. So that information is valuable and applicable to all the grades, from preschool, even before preschool, all the way through high school. The challenges for our older students, it just becomes that much harder. But I want to encourage leaders who work with older students to continue to do that work and look at their systems and structures, because we put barriers in place for older students to learn to read. If they haven't learned to read by grade 3, we just often don't have the systems in place, but people have figured that out. So if a leader is working with older elementary, middle school, high school kids, and they have children who struggle with reading, because they do, look to other creative people who have figured out a way to do things a little differently for those children. I start with that message because the really important message is for those leaders who do work with the younger children, because the message, to me, the clear message that's coming out of research in the science of reading, the research on dyslexia, is one word, and that is prevention. We can, with early identification and appropriate instruction and intervention, prevent almost all reading problems. That there is growing consensus around 95 to 98% of children can be launched into reading. We can teach almost all children to do that basic decoding, and once we do that, it doesn't go away. The brain now has that skill, and I think resources are always limited, as we've acknowledged here today: time, money, people. But if I were in charge of early intervention, I would put everything I had into K1 and 2, and really aim for that. I would set a bar at 98%, because that's what the evidence is saying. There are going to be some children, because of language-based challenges, and that's the limiting factor. But 95 to 98%, that's what we need. That's what we need to be doing. And we as teachers are not going to be able to get there without understanding and support from our leaders, that they set that as the bar. They know it's attainable. Now, how can we use our always limited resources to get there? How can we support our teachers to accomplish that? And then going forward, how can we continue to support children who continue to struggle? So that's my two things.
That was perfect. Again, thank you so much for being here. We could talk about this for hours. I know I could. I know I could. But this has been fabulous. This has been wonderful. We leave this conversation with some really straightforward and clear action steps. And we leave here better equipped to support our students and keep trying. So thank you for joining us. This has been another podcast, another episode of the Science of Reading Leadership Podcast. Join us next time. Happy reading. Thanks for joining us. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We will see you next time on Science of Reading Leadership, guiding minds, transforming lives.